local tattoo shop owner is raising concerns about dangerous and lax tattoo regulations in North Carolina. Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Megan Glova. Those concerns led to a WRAL investigation. Chris Lovingood joins us now with what he found. And Chris, I want to begin with the shop owner that reached out to you. Who is she and what are her concerns?
So she is the owner of a place called Invictus Studios in Raleigh. Her name is Natasha Fuchs, and she messaged me in our email address, right? WRAL Investigates has an email where you can just send us stuff. Not to shameless promote, but if you have an idea we should investigate in, definitely make sure you send it to, I think is it investigates@WRAL.com?
That sounds right.
I think that's what it is. Anyway, and we get a lot of requests, as you know, for people to look into stuff. And we cannot get to every single request. But this one, I stopped because I went, wait a minute. You know, she talked about how one of the concerns she has been trying to talk to people about for years has been the lack of training that is required in North Carolina to become a permitted tattoo artist. And if I say license, I mean to say permit. For some reason, my brain wants to interchange those two. But anyway, and I looked at it and I was like, wait a minute, what? She goes, to be a barber, you have to get X amount of training hours in as an apprentice. Mm-hmm. Not for tattooing. And I said, wait a minute, that's not true.
You're
and I remember,
something permanent on someone.
Exactly. And I Googled it and I was like, oh man. I went to our state website, looked through the permit application, the code and the state law that talks about it. Does not mention training hours at all. And I was like, all right, that's worth talking about. So she and I, we met up at her shop and she showed it. And I asked her, why are you so passionate about, changing this? Obviously, anyone can come up with the answer that she would probably think of. But she was saying, look, you got people that are like, she sees people that have botched tattoos that you have to fix. Someone who, maybe didn't have a trained hand when you go into them and they're coming in, hey, can you fix this for me? That's a problem, right? We're talking about putting ink on someone's skin, right? I mean, It's already a pretty vulnerable thing to be willing to let someone do. But the point she brought up was that you go into a shop, you see someone has a permit on the wall, and you're like, oh, they've got a permit, good to go. You may not know that they have no actual formal training that's with, in the background there. And she even mentioned how when she first got started, she was trained, but there were things that even she did not know that she would discover along the way. Like, oh man, I don't think I know all that. And so she said she took the due diligence to learn and to figure out what she may have not known before. And she even at one point, she wrote this, she showed me, she wrote this book that she gives to the artists that work at her shop, and they are required to go through it to understand not just the techniques, but, bloodborne pathogen situation you have to think of, because again, you're putting ink to someone's skin, understanding about allergies. Apparently there are certain things that you put in certain pigments that someone may be allergic to that they're not privy to. And if they're not privy to it, then the artist isn't as well, but you may not think to ask that before you start. So the more she kept talking, I almost looked at her dumbfounded during most of the interview, because I'm like, you don't need training for this? That was the part that kind of surprised me with it.
It's a little scary.
It is scary. And especially, again, when you compare it to the fact that you need training to at least be a barber. And I don't make that comparison to lessen, to make barbers seem lesser for training. No, you need to know that too, because even with barber shops, they have to understand about, not cross-contaminating blood in case you cut someone's hair, and they cut their skin, etc. What I'm saying is that, like, for something like this, where you're actually going into someone's skin, you don't have any training hours that you need to have here in North Carolina. But plot twist, our neighboring states have rules that you have to actually have some hours that are involved, and not even just hours, but exams too.
Are you able to list off maybe some of the things that are required to get a permit in North Carolina, and then also some of the things that aren't on there that maybe should be?
So in our state, if you, Megan Glova, wanted to become a permitted tattoo artist, what you essentially have to do is apply for a permit. I think it's like 30 days before you're actually going to start the tattooing process. And then the local health department, so we record this in Wake County, so the Wake County Health Department would then inspect the place where you're going to operate. So let's say that was Big Five Tattoo or something like that. And then you pay $300 for the fee. And then after you get the approval from the health department, essentially that permit is good for 1 year. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Little discouraging, but yeah, that's surprising. I mean, again, we were comparing, barbershop, tattoo shop, but even your example with the barbershop, if they accidentally cut someone, that doesn't happen as often as a needle going.
Right.
That's the whole point of tattooing. It's going to be going against the skin.
Well, and that's the concern. I also reached out to, I wanted to make sure that I talked to a dermatologist with this as well. And so UNC, they were very kind and let us talk with Margaret Coates. She is a dermatologist, and I kind of talked to her a little bit about this. And she didn't necessarily advocate for one thing or the other because she was just kind of there in the expert capacity. But I asked her, do you think that there should be required training hours for our state? And essentially she said she didn't think it could hurt. Like, people that are, again, making themselves vulnerable in having a tattoo, reasonably you would think that they would want someone to be trained to understand that, you can get, if you can tattoo improperly, or you may press against the skin too hard and do some damage there. And she even talked about the possible emergence of microbial bacteria that you may not think about as well if maybe you're not properly sanitizing, et cetera, where she mentioned how she has had patients where she has had to quite literally, not to be graphic, cut out the skin because that infection spreads there. And again, if you're not learning about this stuff or understanding the severity of it, you'll be like, oh, well, I don't want to mess up someone's tattoo. Like, sure, I'm not a tattoo artist, but I could probably come up with that on my own. But even I didn't think about the allergy part of that and the microbial bacteria and all that. I didn't even consider that. So if I'm not considering that as someone who's not even interested in tattooing, it's possible that someone who is interested, who hasn't been trained, may not know that.
Right. And you did, jumping back, mention how some of our neighboring states have maybe more proper requirements. Do we know what state or states have the toughest regulations, and how does that compare to North Carolina?
So the ones that we looked at were just our neighbors. I thought that was a pretty good sample size. And so Virginia, for example, you need to have 1,500 hours of an apprenticeship, plus there's an exam that you have to take as well. And then in Tennessee, they require an artist to be trained in a certified tattoo shop for at least a year under a licensed tattoo artist. And in South Carolina, they require 1,000 hours of supervised training and the completion of a course in blood-borne pathology and tattoo infection control. And actually, it didn't work out this way, but one of the artists that are at Invictus Studios, she came from Virginia to North Carolina, and she was very like, you guys' rules down here are almost like non-existent. And we didn't get a chance to interview her because she was ill at the time. But that was the other catalyst that kind of had Natasha reach out to me as well, because she's saying, I've got this artist here and she's concerned about this too. And, a lot of people, I did not realize, because, we're in the news. I'm not in the tattoo world, but I did not realize how much of an issue this was until I started getting more messages from people, or people just kind of reacting to it, like, oh man, I didn't know about that. So, and I actually found out that after our story aired, Natasha told me that a state representative reached out to her and said, hey, I'd like to meet with you. I think we can try to change the law. So, for a journalist, that's obviously important for us. We shouldn't just report what things are, but if we can find a solution for that, I don't know. That's pretty cool to me.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And, it's not just Natasha. You also obtained more tattoo complaints or more complaints from tattoo artists to the health department. What did we find out from those?
So, yeah, these complaints were from people. I think some of them were artists, but I think some are also just those who maybe have went to a place and they thought something was off.
Oh, clients maybe?
Yeah, like clients,
okay.
Yeah, or maybe would-be clients. I think one of the things that we saw people tattooing in their home without a permit.
You can get them on Amazon. Don't take that advice, but you can.
I mean, again, I use the word vulnerable just because, you are, letting somebody do something to your skin that, artistically awesome, but, in terms of, your body, that could harm you if they do it incorrectly, or, you get an infection. But, yeah, some of the complaints were tattooing without a permit. Someone had animals in their building, I think it was dogs, not far away from where the tattooing actually happened. And then, oh goodness, somebody was tattooing at a place without a permit, like an actual tattoo parlor, but without a permit. And then one of them, and this one stood out to me, someone had a playpen in the tattooing room, and then the artist at that shop admitted that, the baby sometimes stays in there. And
interesting.
To me, when I started reading all that, and then when I started, looking into what Natasha's concerns, I was like, all right, I think this is a story. I think it's worth talking about. And, if some change comes from it, great. But it's again the vulnerability of people who really want to have some body art, but the potential of them exposing themselves to harm. That's worth talking about. For me, the journalist, I just want to make sure that I'm protecting people. That's the biggest thing. She would very much, Natasha would very much would like a law to be changed. And I think that's a very fair thing to want. Specifically, I believe it's Representative Julie Von Hafen. I think she's, I think it's Wake County she represents in the 36th district. But I believe they're supposed to be meeting at some point, actually during this recording at some point. But and the goal is to address the law. And I mean, what that looks like, I don't know. I'm not going to be in the room with them, but I surmise they'll discuss maybe having some training hours be required at the minimum. And Natasha had mentioned that she had mentioned something about, I think a place had asked them to have at least 40 hours of training, but I said, is that even enough? She was like, no, that's like 40 hours is not enough training.
But it's more than they have now.
It's more than they're required to take now, yeah. So, but, I think what's interesting is she also reached out. This part I have not looked into, but she had mentioned that there are some classes and stuff that that the state, I think, has made available, or at least some it's at least they're at least aware of it, but they're just not enforcing it or something of the sort. So I don't know. The story, it started off one way and then it just became fascinating to me. And I think, the fact that someone's at least interested in changing the law in terms of a lawmaker sounds like that we'll probably get an update. So, at least down the line.
All right, good. We'll see how that all plays out. Chris, thanks so much. You can find his full story up now on WRAL.com. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. You can find more podcasts from WRAL News at WRAL.com. Search podcast. From sports to true crime, there are plenty of shows to keep you informed and entertained. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.